need to know if I went too far. You know that feeling when you're standing at the edge of a cliff and there's this voice in your head whispering, "Jump." Not because you want to die, but because you want to know what it feels like to fall. That's exactly how I felt the night I decided to destroy 2 lives. Sometimes I wonder if I'm still the same person I was before, or if all that pain I swallowed for months, chewing every humiliation in silence, digesting every lie he fed me, created a version of myself that I no longer recognize. My ex says I destroyed him, that I'm a monster. His exact words were, "You're not the woman I fell in love with. You're something else entirely." But nobody asks how I was doing before I did what I did. Nobody wants to know about the nights I lay awake, listening to him lie over the phone in our bathroom thinking I was asleep. Nobody cares about the woman who slowly disappeared while he was building a new life with someone else. The truth is simple. He replaced me with her, complete with a rehearsed speech about finding his soulmate and not being able to live a lie anymore. But here's what really gets me. He practiced that speech. I know because I heard him rehearsing it in the shower, word for word, like he was preparing for a job interview, not destroying our family. And I didn't scream, didn't cry in front of him, didn't beg him to stay. I just watched, took mental notes, and waited. Because sometimes the most dangerous thing about a quiet person isn't their silence. It's what they're planning while everyone else is talking. And when they least expected it, when they thought they had won, when they were planning their perfect little future together, I left an envelope on the table. Inside it was something neither of them could refute or forget or escape from. What I didn't know is that some truths are doors that, once opened, release things that should have stayed buried forever. Let me paint you a picture of who I used to be, because that woman, she's important to this story. She's the ghost that haunts everything that came after. I've always been methodical, the kind of person who color codes her calendar and keeps backup batteries in every drawer. I like routines, grocery lists written in perfect handwriting, afternoon tea served at exactly 4 p.m., and the smell of clean laundry hanging on the line every Sunday morning. My therapist once told me I use order to control chaos. She wasn't wrong. My life with him was exactly like that. Predictable, comfortable, safe. Like a well-rehearsed dance where we both knew our steps. Monday was grocery shopping. Tuesday was his poker night. Wednesday was date night. Always the same Italian restaurant. Always the same table by the window. Thursday was laundry. Friday was movie night on the couch with our 2 cats. Oh, the cats. Blackie and Whitey. I know. Creativity was never our strong suit. But they were ours. Everything in that little apartment was ours. We met in college during a particularly boring statistics class. I was sitting in the front row, of course I was, and he was 3 rows back, throwing paper airplanes at his friend. When the professor called on him, he answered with complete confidence, despite obviously not paying attention. He was charming like that, effortlessly confident in a way that I never was. After class, he approached me. "Hey, you're the girl who actually takes notes, right? Mind if I borrow them?" That's how it started. Study sessions that turned into coffee dates, that turned into late-night conversations, that turned into 5 years of what I thought was love. The apartment we shared was small, cramped, but it was full of life. Plants on every windowsill. I had this theory that plants made small spaces feel bigger. Books stacked everywhere because we both hoarded novels like other people hoarded shoes. The walls were covered with photos of us at various stages of happiness. College graduation, Our first apartment, holidays with his family, quiet Sunday mornings in bed. Looking back, I can see the exact moment in those photos when his smile started becoming forced, when his eyes stopped reaching mine in pictures, when the space between us on the couch grew a little wider each month. But at the time, I just thought we were growing up, settling into that comfortable phase of long-term relationships where passion gave way to partnership. I was so naive. When I discovered the pregnancy, it was a Thursday. I remember because Thursday was laundry day, and I was folding his work shirts when the nausea hit. At first, I thought it was something I ate. Then I realized I was 2 weeks late. The test was positive, then another one, then a third because sometimes reality needs confirmation. I planned the reveal like a military operation. His favorite dinner, candles, the whole romantic setup. I even bought a little gift box and put the pregnancy test inside with a note that said, "Coming soon, our greatest adventure." His reaction? It wasn't what I expected. He went completely silent. Not shocked, happy silent. Not overwhelmed with joy silent, just empty silent. After what felt like an eternity, he said, "I guess I need to get used to this idea." At the time, I interpreted that as mature responsibility, a man processing unexpected news and stepping up to the challenge. I was proud of him for being thoughtful instead of reactive. Now I realize it was the first time he lied to me to my face about how he really felt. Because while I was getting used to the idea of becoming a mother, he was getting used to the idea of becoming someone else's boyfriend.
During my pregnancy, the changes started small. So small that if you weren't paying attention, really paying attention, you'd miss them entirely. He started working late more often. At first, it was once a week, then twice. Then it became the norm rather than the exception. "Big project at the office," he'd say, kissing my forehead before leaving. "Don't wait up." But here's the thing about lies. They have a scent. Not literally, of course, but they leave traces. Like when he started coming home smelling different. Not just women's perfume, which would have been obvious, but something else. Something I couldn't quite identify, but that didn't belong to our life together. A different laundry detergent. A specific brand of coffee that we didn't buy. Hand lotion that wasn't mine. Small things. Tiny details that whispered of another domestic life happening parallel to ours. And then there were the phone calls. He'd always been social, but suddenly his phone was buzzing constantly. Text messages that made him smile in ways that I hadn't seen in months. Calls he'd take in the other room, speaking in hushed tones that were just low enough that I couldn't make out words, but just loud enough to know he was having conversations he didn't want me to hear. "Work stuff," he'd always say when I asked. Work stuff at 11 p.m. on a Sunday. Work stuff that made him laugh like that. Work stuff that had him typing messages under the dinner table while I talked about my day. The worst part wasn't the lying. It was the way he started looking at me. Or rather, the way he stopped looking at me. You know how couples develop this casual intimacy over time, the way you can communicate entire conversations with just a glance, how you automatically make room for each other in bed, how you instinctively know when to offer comfort or space. All of that started disappearing. He'd walk into a room, and his eyes would skip right over me, like I was furniture. When I spoke, he'd respond with these generic sounds that meant he was physically present, but emotionally somewhere else entirely. And the touches, God, the touches were the worst part. They became performative, obligatory. When he'd kiss me goodbye, it felt like he was kissing a relative at a family reunion. When he'd rub my growing belly, it felt like he was petting a dog, affectionate, but absent. I started documenting things without realizing I was doing it. Not like a detective, but like someone trying to make sense of why the world was shifting beneath her feet. I'd noticed that he'd shower as soon as he got home from these late work sessions. I'd find receipts for restaurants we'd never been to together. I'd see him delete text messages before reading them to me. And then came the day that changed everything. It was a Saturday morning. I was about 7 months pregnant, lying on the couch because everything hurt and I couldn't get comfortable anywhere. I was eating saltine crackers, the only thing that didn't make me nauseous, and watching some mindless TV show. His phone was on the coffee table. It buzzed with a text message. The preview on the lock screen said, "Daddy's Princess. Can't wait to see you tonight. I have a surprise for you." Daddy's Princess. With that specific emoji, that cutesy, flirtatious tone that was so different from how anyone at his office would communicate. He was in the shower, the message was right there, and for the first time in our relationship, I felt the urge to invade his privacy. But I didn't, because I was still that trusting woman who believed in the benefit of the doubt, who made excuses for the person she loved. When he came out of the shower, I asked about it casually. "Your phone buzzed. Someone named Daddy's Princess?" He laughed, actually laughed. "Oh, that's just Jake from work. He's been pranking everyone with weird contact names. You know how guys are." And I believed him, because the alternative was too devastating to consider. That night, I lay in bed listening to him breathe beside me, and I realized I didn't know this person anymore. The man I'd been sharing a bed with for months was a stranger who happened to have my boyfriend's face. And that's when I started to change too. Because when someone you love starts treating you like you're invisible, you have two choices: disappear or become impossible to ignore. I chose the latter. When my daughter was born, I thought everything would reset, that holding his child would remind him of who we used to be together, that the miracle of creating life would overshadow whatever else was pulling him away from us. For exactly 12 days, I was right. He was present for the birth, physically, emotionally, completely. He held my hand through every contraction, whispered encouragement when I wanted to give up, and cried when our daughter took her first breath. In that moment, in that hospital room, we were a family. He took paternity leave. He did the 3 a.m. feedings without complaining. He'd talk to her in that sweet, silly voice that parents use with babies. He'd walk around the apartment bouncing her while singing off-key lullabies. For 12 perfect days, I believed we had found our way back to each other. On day 13, his phone rang during one of those 3 a.m. feedings. He was holding our daughter, giving her a bottle, and I was half asleep on the couch beside them. "Hello," he whispered, trying not to wake me. Even in my drowsy state, I could hear the voice on the other end. Female. Urgent. Familiar. "I can't talk right now," he said, walking toward the kitchen. She's right here. She's right here. Not, my girlfriend is here or my family is here. She. Like I was an obstacle to be navigated around. The next morning, I found him in the nursery, staring at our daughter while she slept. But his expression wasn't the adoring father look I'd grown accustomed to. It was conflicted, like he was looking at evidence of a crime he'd committed. "You okay?" I asked softly. He startled, like he'd forgotten I existed. "Yeah, just, thinking." "About what?" He looked at me then, and I saw something in his eyes I had never seen before. Not just guilt, not just regret, but something darker. Something that looked like resentment.
Nothing important, he said, kissing the top of my head in that mechanical way that had become his default. Always work stuff. 2 days later, on a Tuesday, I remember it was Tuesday because I was supposed to introduce bottles so I could return to work, he asked if we could talk. The conversation lasted exactly 4 minutes and 37 seconds. I know because I was feeding our daughter while he spoke, and she fell asleep in my arms right as he finished explaining why he was leaving us. "It's not fair to any of us to keep pretending," he said, standing awkwardly by the window while I sat frozen on the couch. "It's like I've been lying to you, to myself, to everyone, and I can't do it anymore." He talked about being in love with someone else, about how it just happened, and he never meant for this to happen, about how he wanted to handle everything with respect and dignity. Respect and dignity, as if those words could somehow make abandoning your 2-week-old daughter sound noble. The worst part wasn't the admission of the affair. It wasn't even him leaving. The worst part was the relief in his voice when he said it. Like he'd been holding his breath for months and was finally allowed to exhale. He packed 2 suitcases. Somehow he had managed to have a whole life that fit into 2 suitcases, kissed our sleeping daughter's forehead, and walked out the door. He didn't kiss me goodbye. That night, after spending 4 hours crying on the kitchen floor while my daughter slept peacefully in her bassinet, I had a realization. I wasn't just angry about the betrayal. I was angry about the waste. The waste of time, of love, of the woman I'd been before all this started. The waste of believing in someone who'd been planning his exit strategy while I was planning our future. And that's when I started planning too.
The messages from his family started 3 days after he left. Not messages of support or condolences for the woman left alone with a newborn. Messages asking me to be patient and understanding during this difficult time. As if I was the inconvenient one in the situation. As if I was the one who had disrupted the natural order of things. His mother actually called to tell me that these things happen and that I should focus on healing and moving forward. When I pointed out that her son had abandoned his infant daughter, she said, "Well, maybe this is for the best. Maybe you two just weren't meant to be. Maybe this is for the best." 24 hours after that conversation, she showed up at my door, the other woman. I was wearing a milk-stained t-shirt and hadn't showered in 3 days. My hair was in the kind of messy bun that's not stylish but functional, keeping hair out of your face while you're trying to keep a tiny human alive. I looked exactly like what I was, a single mother barely holding it together. She looked like a woman who had never had to choose between showering and sleeping. "Hi," she said, holding a baby car seat with one hand and balancing a diaper bag on her shoulder. "I'm Sarah. I think we need to talk." My first instinct was to slam the door. My second was to grab the kitchen knife. My third, and the one I went with, was to invite her in for tea. Because I'm nothing if not civilized. She walked through my apartment like she was taking inventory. Her eyes lingered on the photos still hanging on the walls, photos of him and me, of our life together, of the family we'd been building before she came along. "I always wondered what your place looked like," she said, settling into the chair where he used to sit to read the morning paper. "I imagined it differently." "How so?" I asked, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. "Bigger, I guess. More sophisticated." She was beautiful in that effortless way that some women are, the kind of beautiful that doesn't require thought or effort, just genetics and good luck. Her hair fell in perfect waves, her skin looked like she'd never had a stressful day in her life, and her clothes were the kind of expensive casual that cost more than my monthly rent. But it wasn't her beauty that got to me. It was her confidence. The way she sat in my space, holding her baby, completely disrupting my life for the second time. "I want you to know," she said, adjusting her son in her arms, "that I never meant for it to happen this way." "What way did you mean for it to happen?"
She paused, like she'd never considered that there might not be a good way to steal someone's boyfriend while they're carrying his child. I want you to know that he's happy now, really happy. He says he feels like himself for the first time in years. He feels like himself for the first time in years? The implication was clear. The version of himself he'd been with me was false, a performance, a role he'd been playing while waiting for his real life to begin. But then she said the thing that changed everything. And our son, he's given him a new purpose. He says he finally understands what it means to be a father. Finally understands what it means to be a father? I looked at her baby, maybe 3 months old, chubby cheeks, bright eyes, that perfect baby smell that makes your ovaries ache. Then I looked toward the nursery, where my daughter was napping. The math didn't add up. If her baby is 12 months old and she'd been with my boyfriend for how long exactly? When had this started? How long had he been living a double life? How old is your son? I asked, trying to keep my voice casual. 12 weeks tomorrow, she said proudly. Right on schedule. Right on schedule. My daughter was 3 weeks old. If Sarah's baby was 12 weeks old, that meant... When did you and he start seeing each other? She looked uncomfortable for the first time since arriving. That's complicated. Complicated how? We met about 8 months ago, but we didn't... nothing happened right away. 8 months ago. I was 4 months pregnant 8 months ago. 4 months pregnant, and planning a nursery, and believing my boyfriend when he said he was excited about becoming a father. Did he know? When you got pregnant, did he know about my pregnancy? She looked down at her baby, avoiding my eyes. Like I said, it's complicated. But I didn't need her to explain. The timeline was clear. He'd gotten her pregnant while I was pregnant. He'd been planning a life with her while planning a life with me. He'd been present for her pregnancy while treating mine like an inconvenience. And that's when the idea first formed. Your baby is beautiful, I said, walking over to look at him more closely. He has his eyes. She beamed with pride. Everyone says that. He's definitely going to be a heartbreaker like his daddy. Like his daddy. I smiled and offered her more tea. I asked her about her pregnancy, her birth experience, her recovery. I was the picture of civilized conversation. But inside, I was taking notes. Because something about this whole situation didn't feel right, and I've always been good at solving puzzles. After she left, I sat in the quiet of my apartment and let the pieces fall into place. The timeline, the way he'd reacted to my pregnancy, the relief in his voice when he left, the way his family was so eager to support his new relationship. And then I remembered something else, something that had been bothering me since she walked in. Her baby looked nothing like him. Nothing at all.
Have you ever had a thought that you couldn't shake? The kind of idea that burrows into your brain and grows there like a parasite, feeding on your doubt and suspicion until it becomes the only thing you can think about? That's what happened after Sarah's visit. I couldn't stop thinking about the timeline, about her baby's features, about the way she'd avoided certain questions and answered others too quickly. I started doing what I do best: research. Social media became my investigative tool. Sarah's Instagram was public, because of course it was. Beautiful people love audiences. I scrolled through months of photos, looking for clues. There were pictures of her pregnancy journey, professional maternity photos with soft lighting and flowing dresses, updates about cravings and nursery preparations, all the typical expectant mother content. But the dates were interesting. Her first pregnancy announcement was posted 7 months ago. Not 8 months ago, when she claimed they had met. 7 months ago, when I was already 5 months pregnant and very obviously showing. I kept digging. There were photos from before the pregnancy announcement.
photos at bars and restaurants and parties. And in some of those photos, in the background, barely visible unless you were looking for it, another man. Not my boyfriend, someone else entirely. Someone who appeared in multiple photos over several months, always positioned like a boyfriend. An arm around his waist, a kiss on the cheek, the comfortable intimacy of an established relationship. I screenshotted everything, created a timeline, cross-referenced dates and locations. And then I found the smoking gun. A photo from 9 months ago, a month before she claimed to have met my boyfriend. She was at a restaurant with his other man, and the caption read, "Date night with my favorite person, can't wait to see where this goes." 9 months ago, right around the time her baby would have been conceived. I stared at that photo for hours. This other man had dark hair and brown eyes, just like Sarah's baby. He had the same nose, the same chin, the same smile. My ex-boyfriend had blue eyes and blonde hair. Sarah's baby looked nothing like him because Sarah's baby wasn't his. But if that was true, then why? And then it hit me. The most devastating, manipulative, brilliant con I'd ever encountered. She hadn't stolen my boyfriend. She'd used him to escape responsibility for her pregnancy with someone else. Used him to play house while her real baby daddy was probably off living his own life, completely unaware he had a son. My ex-boyfriend hadn't just cheated on me, he'd been played by a woman who saw him as a solution to her problem. A stable, employed, gullible man who could be convinced to take responsibility for another man's child. And me? I was just collateral damage in her scheme. I spent the next week planning. Not revenge, not yet. Just fact-gathering. I needed proof, real proof, the kind that couldn't be dismissed or explained away. I remembered that Sarah had used my bathroom during her visit. I remembered finding a long, dark hair on the sink afterward, a hair that I'd absently wrapped around my finger and thrown away. But I'm methodical, remember? I hadn't thrown it away. I'd put it in a tissue and stuck it in the junk drawer because that's what anal retentive people do with random things they find in their house. I also remembered that my ex-boyfriend had left behind his electric toothbrush when he moved out, still in the bathroom cabinet, still holding traces of his DNA. The DNA testing facility was surprisingly discreet. I told them I was settling a paternity dispute for legal purposes. They didn't ask questions. They just took my samples and my money and told me to wait. 5 days. 5 days of living with the possibility that I was wrong, that I was becoming the kind of person who investigates innocent people based on social media stalking and suspicious timelines. 5 days of wondering if I was losing my mind. And then the envelope arrived.
The envelope sat on my kitchen table for 2 hours before I opened it. I kept walking past it, doing other things, pretending it wasn't there. I fed my daughter. I did dishes. I folded laundry. I reorganized the spice cabinet. Anything to avoid confronting what was inside. Because once I opened that envelope, there would be no going back. If I was right, I would have proof that my ex-boyfriend had been manipulated into abandoning his real family for a woman who was using him. If I was wrong, I would have proof that I'd become a paranoid stalker who violated people's privacy based on jealousy and suspicion. Either way, I would have to live with the consequences of what I'd done. Finally, as the sun was setting and my daughter was sleeping peacefully in her bassinet, I sat down at the kitchen table and opened the envelope. The report was surprisingly simple. Just a few pages of technical information and charts that I didn't understand, followed by a single conclusive statement. The probability of paternity is 0%. The tested male is excluded as the biological father of the tested child. 0%. I read it 3 times to make sure I understood correctly. Sarah's baby was not my ex-boyfriend's child, which meant everything I'd suspected was true.
She had used him. She had manipulated him into believing he was responsible for her pregnancy. She'd convinced him to leave his real family to play house with her and another man's child. And he had believed her. My first emotion wasn't vindication. It wasn't satisfaction or relief. It was rage. Pure, white-hot rage at the waste of it all, at the months of lies and manipulation, at the way she'd looked at me in my own apartment and talked about how happy he was, how he finally understood what it meant to be a father, at the way she'd stolen my life and convinced him it was an upgrade. But then, underneath the rage, came something else, something colder and more calculated. An opportunity. Because I had something now that she didn't know I had. I had proof. I had the power to reveal the truth, to destroy the fantasy she'd constructed, to show my ex-boyfriend exactly what he'd traded his real family for, and I was going to use it. I picked up my phone and sent 2 text messages. The first to him, "We need to talk, all 3 of us, tomorrow night at 7, my place." The second to her, "I think we should clear the air. Can you and he come over tomorrow evening? I want to do this properly." They both responded within minutes. He was cautious, but agreed. She seemed pleased, probably thinking I was ready to have some civilized co-parenting conversation. Neither of them had any idea what was coming. I put the DNA report back in its envelope and placed it in the center of the kitchen table, right where I knew they'd both see it when they sat down. And then I started planning the most important dinner party of my life. I spent the entire next day preparing, not just the food and the atmosphere, but myself. I needed to be perfect, calm, controlled, devastatingly composed. I showered and did my hair properly for the first time since giving birth. I put on makeup, not too much, just enough to look like I'd made an effort. I chose my outfit carefully, a simple black dress that made me look like I put together, but not like I was trying too hard. I wanted to look like the kind of woman who had her life together, the kind of woman who deserved better than what she'd gotten. I cleaned the apartment until it sparkled. I arranged flowers in a vase. I set the table with our good dishes, the ones we'd gotten as engagement gifts from friends who thought we were going to get married. I made his favorite meal, roast chicken with rosemary and garlic, the way his mother had taught me, mashed potatoes, green beans, apple pie for dessert. If this was going to be the last time we were all in the same room together, I wanted it to be memorable. They arrived together at exactly 7 p.m. I heard his key in the lock, followed by her voice in the hallway. "This is nice of her. I think we can all be mature about the situation." Mature. I waited until they were both in the living room before emerging from the kitchen. I wanted to make an entrance. He looked uncomfortable. He was wearing the blue shirt I'd bought him for his birthday last year, and his hair was longer than he used to keep it. He looked like a man trying to become someone else. She looked radiant, like she always did. She was carrying her baby in one of those expensive carriers that cost more than most people's car payments. Picture-perfect motherhood. "Thank you for doing this," he said awkwardly, not quite meeting my eyes. "I know this can't be easy." "It's not," I said simply, "but I think it's necessary." I invited them to sit at the dining table. I'd set 3 places, with the envelope positioned exactly in the center, impossible to miss. "Before we eat," I said, taking my seat across from them, "I have something I need to share with both of you." She glanced at the envelope, then at me. "What is it?" "Open it," I said. They looked at each other. He reached for the envelope first, but she put her hand on his arm. "Maybe we should talk first before we... whatever this is." "No," I said firmly. "Open it." He opened the envelope. I watched his face as he read the first page, then the second Then the conclusion. I watched the color drain from his skin. I watched his hands start to shake. "What is it?" Sarah asked, trying to see over his shoulder. He handed her the papers without saying a word. Her reaction was different from his. Where he went pale and silent, she went red and defensive. "This is fake. This is some kind of joke. Where did you get this?" "From a licensed DNA testing facility. It's completely legitimate." "But this is impossible. The baby is his. I would know if the baby wasn't his." "Would you?" I asked quietly. And that's when I saw it. The flicker of something in her eyes. Not confusion, not shock, recognition. She knew. She had always known. "You used him," I said, my voice still calm but growing stronger. "You got pregnant by someone else and you used him to avoid dealing with the consequences. That's not... You manipulated him into believing he was responsible for your pregnancy. You convinced him to leave his real family to play house with you and another man's child. And he had believed her." She stood up abruptly, her baby crying in response to her sudden movement. "You don't understand the situation I was in. The real father, he wanted nothing to do with us. I was alone and scared and pregnant, and then I met him and he was so kind, so stable. So you decided to ruin his life instead of dealing with your own problems." "I didn't mean for it to go this far. I thought maybe if we were together long enough, if he fell in love with the baby, it wouldn't matter who the biological father was." "But it does matter," he said quietly. "It matters because I have a real daughter, a daughter I abandoned because I believed your lies." He looked at me then, and I saw something I hadn't seen in months. Clarity. Like he was finally seeing the situation for what it really was. "Can I..." He started, then stopped. "Can I see her? Our daughter?"
That should have been the end of the story. The moment of truth, the revelation, the comeuppance. Justice served, lessons learned, everyone moving forward with clarity and honesty. But life isn't a movie. Real stories don't have clean endings. Sarah left that night without another word. She packed up her baby and walked out of our lives as abruptly as she'd entered them. No apologies, no explanations, no attempts to make things right. Just gone. He stayed. We talked until dawn, sitting on the couch while our daughter slept between us. He apologized over and over, as if repetition could somehow undo the damage he'd caused. He told me about the confusion, the guilt, the way Sarah had made him feel like staying with me would be selfish, how she'd convinced him that their relationship was meant to be, and that fighting it would only hurt everyone more. He'd been manipulated, yes, but he'd also made choices. He'd chosen to believe what was convenient rather than questioning what didn't make sense. "I want to come home," he said, as the sun was rising. "I want to be a father to our daughter. I want to fix this." And that's when I realized something that surprised me. I didn't want him back. Not because I didn't love him anymore, not because I couldn't forgive him, but because I had changed during those weeks of being alone. I had discovered that I was stronger than I'd ever imagined, that I could handle whatever life threw at me without needing someone else to make me feel complete. The woman who had planned this dinner party, who had investigated and schemed and manipulated the truth to the surface, she was someone I had never been before. Someone I wasn't sure I liked, but someone I respected. "I think," I said carefully, "that we need to figure out how to co-parent before we figure out how to be together. If we ever do." He looked hurt, but he nodded. "I understand. I have a lot to prove." And he did try. He moved into an apartment nearby. He took our daughter on weekends. He was present for doctor's appointments and sleepless nights and all the mundane moments that make up parenthood.
But something had fundamentally shifted. The trust was gone, yes, but more than that, the need was gone. I no longer needed him to validate my choices or complete my life. I had learned to be whole on my own. For a while, it seemed like we might find our way to a new normal: co-parenting, mutual respect, maybe even friendship eventually. But then the strange things started happening. It started with small things that could be easily explained away or dismissed as coincidence. The baby monitor crackling with static at exactly 3:12 a.m. every night. Not 3:10 or 3:15, exactly 3:12, as if something was following a schedule. I'd wake up, check the monitor, see nothing unusual in my daughter's room, and go back to sleep. Just electronic interference, I told myself. Old building, thin walls, probably picking up signals from other apartments. Then came the dreams. Every night, the same dream. I'm sitting at the dining room table, and the envelope is in front of me. But when I open it, instead of the DNA results, there is a single line of text. Some doors should never be opened. I'd wake up feeling like someone had been watching me sleep. My daughter started acting strangely too. She'd wake up crying at exactly 3:12 a.m. just when the monitor would start crackling. But when I'd go to her room, she'd be staring at the corner by the window, completely calm, as if she was looking at something fascinating. "What do you see, baby?" I'd whisper, following her gaze. Nothing. Just shadows and moonlight filtering through the curtains. But she'd track something with her eyes, something moving from the corner to the door to the closet, something I couldn't see. One night, she said her first word. Not mama or dada like most babies, not more or up or any of the typical first words that parents eagerly await. She pointed to the corner of her room at 3:12 a.m. and said, clear as day, "Mad." When I told her father about it, he suggested we install a better baby monitor. Maybe the old one was malfunctioning, creating false sounds that were disrupting her sleep. So we bought a new one, high-tech, with multiple cameras and crystal clear audio. No more static, no more interference. But the strange occurrences didn't stop. They escalated. The new monitor showed things the old one never had. Shadows that moved independently of any light source, temperature fluctuations that registered on the screen but couldn't be felt in the room, and sounds, whispers, footsteps, the faint echo of what sounded like arguing. I started recording everything: screenshots of the monitor's readings, audio recordings of the whispers, video footage of the shadows. When I showed them to my ex-boyfriend, he was concerned not about ghosts or supernatural explanations, but about my mental state. "You've been under a lot of stress. New mother, recent breakup, all this drama with Sarah. Maybe you should talk to someone." Maybe he was right. Maybe I was losing my mind. Maybe the isolation and sleep deprivation were making me see things that weren't there. But then came the night that changed everything. I was in the kitchen, making a bottle for my daughter, when I heard it clearly through the baby monitor. The sound of a man's voice, low and angry, coming from her room. I ran upstairs, expecting to find an intruder, ready to fight for my child's safety. The room was empty. My daughter was sleeping peacefully, undisturbed by whatever I'd heard. But on the monitor screen, I could see the thermal reading, a heat signature in the shape of a person standing right next to her crib. I grabbed my daughter and ran to the neighbor's apartment. I called the police, I called my ex-boyfriend, I called anyone who would listen. The police found nothing. No signs of forced entry, no evidence of an intruder. The thermal reading on the monitor was dismissed as a technical glitch. But I knew what I saw, and I knew it wasn't a glitch. My ex-boyfriend moved back in temporarily, sleeping on the couch to help me feel safer. For a few nights, everything was quiet.
normal. The monitor showed nothing unusual, my daughter slept through the night, and I started to think that maybe his presence had solved whatever was happening. But then, on the fourth night, at exactly 3:12 a.m., my daughter woke up crying. Not the usual infant cry that means hunger or discomfort, a terrified wail, like she was seeing something that scared her. We both ran to her room. She was standing in her crib, pointing to the corner, screaming at something we couldn't see. And then she said it. Not mad this time, something else. Something that made my blood run cold. Daddy, mad. Daddy, hurt. My ex-boyfriend went pale. "She's talking about me," he said. "She's scared of me because of everything that's happened." But I knew better, because she wasn't looking at him when she said it. She was looking at the empty corner of the room, at the space where the thermal reading had appeared on the monitor. She was talking to someone else. Someone who wasn't there. Someone who had every reason to be angry.
The next morning, I did something I hadn't done since the night of the dinner party. I called Sarah. She answered on the first ring as if she'd been waiting for my call. "I wondered when you'd reach out," she said, her voice different from before, colder, more knowing. "We need to talk," I said. "I'm sure we do." We met at a coffee shop downtown. She looked different too. Thinner, paler, like she hadn't been sleeping well. Her baby was with her, but he seemed fussier than before, crying constantly despite her efforts to soothe him. "Strange things have been happening," I said without preamble. She nodded. "I know." "You know?" "They're happening to me too. To us," she gestured to her baby. "He hasn't slept through the night since that dinner. He cries at exactly 3:12 every morning. And sometimes," she paused, looking around the coffee shop as if checking for eavesdroppers. "Sometimes I hear him talking to someone in his room, someone who isn't there. What do you think is happening?" "I think," she said slowly, "that your little revelation had consequences you didn't anticipate." "What do you mean?" She leaned forward, lowering her voice. "After that night, after the truth came out, he disappeared. Completely. No one has seen him or heard from him. His family thinks he's having a breakdown somewhere, but what? But I think something else happened. I think the shock of learning that everything he'd built was a lie, that he'd abandoned his real child for another man's baby, that he'd been played so completely, I think it broke something in him." "You think he's dead?" "I think he's gone," she corrected. "Whether that means dead or just elsewhere, I don't know. But I know that whatever happened to him started that night, in your apartment, when you showed us that DNA test." "Are you blaming me for his disappearance?" "I'm not blaming you for anything. I'm just saying that actions have consequences. And some consequences are more severe than we expect." She stood up, gathering her baby and his diaper bag. "The thing is," she said, looking down at me, "I don't think he's really gone. I think he's stuck, caught between what he thought was real and what actually was real. And I think he's angry." "Angry at who?" "At all of us. At me for lying to him, at you for exposing the lie, at himself for believing it, at the whole situation that destroyed his life." She paused at the door of the coffee shop. "You wanted to know the truth. You got it. But some truths are too heavy for the living to carry. And when that happens, sometimes the dead have to help." After she left, I sat in that coffee shop for 2 hours, thinking about what she'd said. Had I killed him? Not directly, but had my need for truth and justice driven him to a place where he couldn't survive? Had my carefully planned revelation been an act of justice or an act of murder? That night, I put my daughter to bed and sat in the living room, waiting for 3:12 a.m. When the time came, I didn't wait for the crying or the strange sounds. I walked to her room and opened the door. She was standing in her crib, looking at the corner, but she wasn't crying. She was smiling. "Hi, Daddy," she said clearly, reaching her arms toward the empty space. And for just a moment, in the dim light from the hallway, I could have sworn I saw him there. Translucent, wavering, like heat shimmer on summer pavement. But there. "I'm sorry," I whispered to the empty room. "I'm so sorry." The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. The baby monitor crackled with static, and my daughter laughed, a happy, innocent sound that somehow made everything worse. Because she could see him. She could see what I had created, and he was never going away. That was 6 months ago. I still live in the same apartment. I still follow the same routines. I still get up at 3:12 a.m. when my daughter wakes up to talk to her father. Because that's what she calls him now. Not the man who abandoned us, who I've barely seen since that night in the coffee shop. She calls the presence in her room Daddy, the shadow that plays with her toys and sings her lullabies that I can't hear. I've stopped trying to explain it to people. When friends ask how I'm doing as a single mother, I tell them I'm managing. When they ask if I ever hear from my ex, I say no. Both of those things are true in their way. I've learned to live with the consequences of my actions. I wanted the truth, and I got it. I wanted justice, and I got it. I wanted to expose the lies and manipulation that had destroyed my family. But I also got something I didn't expect: responsibility for what came after. Sometimes, late at night, when the apartment is quiet, except for the sound of my daughter babbling happily to someone I can't see, I wonder if I should have just let it go. If I should have accepted the betrayal and moved on without needing to prove that I was right. But then I remember the look on Sarah's face when she realized her con had been exposed. I remembered the relief in his voice when he finally understood what had really happened. I remember the feeling of reclaiming my own narrative after months of being gaslit and manipulated. And I think that maybe some truths are worth the price we pay for them. My daughter is starting to talk more now. Full sentences, complex thoughts, the rapid development that amazes and terrifies every parent. Last week, she asked me a question that I'm still trying to answer. "Mommy," she said, looking up at me with those serious eyes that seemed too old for her face, "why is Daddy sad?" I don't know how to tell her that sometimes when we love someone, we can hurt them so badly that they never recover. That sometimes our need to be right can destroy the very people we're trying to protect. I don't know how to explain that the man who visits her room at 3:12 a.m. isn't really her father anymore, but something else. Something created by guilt and regret and the terrible weight of consequences. So I just hold her close and tell her that Daddy loves her very much and that sometimes love is complicated. And somewhere in the corner of her room, where the shadows are always a little deeper than they should be, I think I hear him agree. Did I destroy his life? Or think he destroyed it himself when he chose to believe convenient lies over difficult truths? Did I go too far in my quest for justice? Or did I simply refuse to be a victim of someone else's manipulation? I may never know the answers to those questions, but I know this. I am not the same woman who discovered that pregnancy test on a Thursday morning, who believed in love and trust and the possibility of happily ever after. I am someone harder now. Someone who understands that truth is a weapon, and like all weapons, it can cause more damage than the problem it was meant to solve. But I am also someone who refused to disappear, who refused to let her story be written by people who saw her as disposable. And maybe, in the end, that's worth the price of living with ghosts. The question I leave you with is this: how far would you go to reclaim your truth? And would you be able to live with the consequences of that choice? Because sometimes the most dangerous thing about seeking justice isn't that you might not find it. It's that you might.